All right, let's picture this. A war breaks out between the US and Iran. Now, India isn't even involved, but all of a sudden, its economy is in a complete free fall. That's the scenario we're unpacking today. It's a crisis that's forcing India to take a hard look at its entire game plan when it comes to a really powerful economic weapon, unilateral sanctions.
So the setup is pretty stark, right? And the consequences, they're hitting immediately. We are literally seeing these massive shockwaves just ripple through one of the world's biggest economies, and believe me, it is happening fast.
And here is the first major casualty. According to the IMF, India just slipped from a projected 4th place all the way down to 6th in the rankings of the world's largest economies. I mean, that is a stunning drop, and it really just goes to show you how vulnerable the whole system can be.
And you know, this isn't just some abstract number on a chart. The pain is very, very real. We're talking about energy bills going through the roof, supply chains just completely breaking down, exports slumping, and of course, inflation is hitting everybody's wallets while the rupee takes a nosedive. The economic damage is just piling up, and it's piling up fast.
Okay, so to really get how we got here, we're going to follow a pretty clear path. First, we'll look at the immediate fallout from this war. Then, we'll dig into the real problem, the one that's been lurking just under the surface. After that, we'll tally up the price India has paid for its choices, explore a possible way out of this mess, and finally, we're going to connect all of this to a really critical moment in the nation's history.
So, even though India has absolutely no direct role in this fictional war, its economy is completely trapped in the crossfire. You've got this double blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, and just like that, India becomes a major victim of a conflict happening thousands of miles away. It's pretty wild. But here's the twist. The source material we're looking at argues that this war, it's just the trigger. The real problem, the underlying pressure point that's been building up for years, is the whole system of unilateral US sanctions. Okay, so just to make sure we're all on the same page, let's quickly define what unilateral sanctions actually means. Basically, it's when one country decides to act all by itself, using its economic power to punish another country, totally bypassing international groups like the UN Security Council.
And this quote from a former head of India's central bank just nails the problem perfectly. He calls it a whack-a-mole game. I mean, what a brilliant metaphor, right? It just captures the chaotic, unpredictable, and kind of random nature of how these sanctions get slapped on.
And while this chart just perfectly illustrates the scale we're talking about, the data shows that the US is, by a massive margin, the world's #1 user of sanctions this century. It's not even a close race. Just look at that, 365 from the US compared to just 12 counter-sanctions from others combined. That's a huge difference.
And this timeline, this just shows the constant policy whiplash India is dealing with. 1 minute, you're told to zero out Iranian oil. A few years later, the pressure's on to end Russian oil imports. Then, whoops, suddenly Venezuelan oil is back on the table. Waivers are granted, then they're about to expire. So I ask you, how can any country possibly build a stable, long-term energy strategy in an environment like this?
Which, brings us to a really key question raised in the source material. Has playing by these rules actually helped India at all? The argument being made here is that compliance hasn't just failed to stop more pressure, it's actually come at a massive cost.
And look, these aren't just theoretical what-ifs. We're talking about real consequences. By stopping the purchase of discounted oil, India lost out on billions in potential savings. By slowing down work on the Chabahar port, it lost a super important alternative trade route. It all adds up to very real, tangible economic and strategic losses.
Now, this comparison is really fascinating. Check this out. On one hand, India complied with the oil sanctions and, paid a really heavy price. But on the other hand, it completely defied U.S. warnings and went ahead and bought the Russian S-400 missile system. And the result? No penalties. In fact, the system proved to be strategically vital. It really makes you wonder, right? When does just following the rules simply invite even more pressure?
So, if compliance is so costly and defiance can actually pay off, what's the alternative here? Well, the source suggests a much more proactive approach, to start actively building systems that are designed to resist and even bypass these kinds of unilateral economic pressures. And this isn't just some vague idea either. The article actually lays out some very concrete steps. We're talking about things like building new payment systems that don't depend on the US dollar, using financial institutions that are air-gapped, basically insulated from Western pressure. And of course, a big one, massively expanding renewable and alternative energy to cut down that dependence in the first place.
And the implications of this are huge.
Because if India could successfully pull this off, it wouldn't just be a win for India. It could actually create a blueprint for other developing nations in the global south, potentially inspiring a much wider, collective pushback against these kinds of coercive economic tactics.
Now, to really get why this issue is so important, the source draws a really powerful parallel to a defining moment in India's history. Because you see, this isn't the first time the country has been in a situation like this, not by a long shot.
Let's wind the clock back to 1966. India is in the grip of a terrible famine. To feed its people, it completely depends on wheat shipments from the U.S. But the U.S. government starts restricting those shipments, putting them on what it called a short tether, basically approving them only 1 month at a time to put political pressure on India's foreign policy. This created what was grimly known as a ship-to-mouth existence.
And in response to that humiliation, Prime Minister Indira Gandhi made a famous vow. That promise became a national rallying cry. It sparked the Green Revolution and kicked off an intense, decades-long drive for food self-sufficiency, a goal that India, against all odds, eventually achieved.
And all of this brings us right back to the final critical question for today. Is this modern-day sanctions squeeze really just about economics and oil prices, or is it something more? Is it, like that food crisis back in 1966, a fundamental challenge to India's ability to make its own decisions, a direct blow to its strategic autonomy? That's the question that really connects a painful past to a very, very uncertain future.